Hey everyone, welcome back for another deep dive. Today we're going to be exploring the vast and vibrant world of folk music.
And I gotta say, this isn't just gonna be about some old dusty tunes. We're talking about a genre deeply connected to social movements and cultural identity.
Right. It's like, when you really think about it, folk music tells the story of, well, us. It's the music of the people reflecting their lives, their struggles, and their hopes.
Exactly. It's the soundtrack to the human experience, passed down through generations. But what really makes folk music unique, you ask, it's all about that oral tradition.
So you're saying it's like a living, breathing thing, changing and evolving over time.
Precisely. These songs, they're not frozen in time. They get passed down, reinterpreted, each generation adding their own spin on things. Take House of the Rising Sun, for instance. Tons of versions out there, each with its own flavor, showing how folk music transcends, like, borders and time.
That's so cool. And speaking of transcending borders, our little deep dive here really highlighted how American folk music is like a melting pot of sound shaped by, well, the immigrant experience, right?
Absolutely. You've got European folk music mixing with the incredibly rich musical traditions brought over from Africa by enslaved people. And then you add in the influence of Native American music. It all comes together to create something truly unique.
Like a musical tapestry or something, right? All these different threads woven together. And you know what really struck me? The banjo, such a central instrument in American folk music, actually originated in Africa.
It's mind-blowing, isn't it? The banjo's journey from Africa to becoming a staple of American folk music really highlights how interconnected cultures are. And we wouldn't even be able to trace these connections without the work of people like John and Ellen Lomax.
Oh yeah, the Lomaxes, they were like musical anthropologists, traveling around recording all those amazing folk songs that might have been lost forever. It's like they hit record on history in the making. But I'm curious, how did this music, so rooted in tradition, handle the massive changes and, let's be honest, hardships that America faced in the early 20th century?
That's where things get really interesting. The Great Depression and the Dust Bowl were periods of immense hardship for so many Americans. And what did people turn to? Music, of course.
It's like when times get tough, music becomes even more important, right?
Yeah.
It's a source of comfort and solidarity.
Exactly, and no one captured the spirit of that era better than Woody Guthrie. This guy, he was the voice of working-class America, singing about their struggles, their frustrations, but also their resilience.
Oh, absolutely. His songs weren't just tunes, they were like dispatches from the front lines of the Depression. And This Land Is Your Land, talk about an anthem for a nation facing some seriously tough times. It's incredible how music can capture the spirit of an entire generation.
And that spirit, man, it carried right on through the 60s, a decade where folk music kind of blew up, becoming like totally intertwined with the whole social and political scene.
Yeah, it's hard to imagine, like, the civil rights movement or those big anti-war protests without picturing those iconic folk songs. That music gave a voice to a generation hungry for change.
Absolutely. And one of the key figures bridging that gap between like the music and the movement was Pete Seeger. Man, he really believed in the power of song to like inspire action and unite people.
Yes, Seeger was more than a musician, right? He was almost like a musical activist, using his songs to rally people around causes he believed in. And they weren't just like catchy tunes either. They were calls to action.
No doubt. Take We Shall Overcome. That became like the anthem of the civil rights movement. But it wasn't just a song, it was a statement. This statement of defiance, of hope, sung on picket lines and at rallies. It's powerful stuff. Seeger's music, and really the music of so many folk artists at that time, became like the soundtrack to a generation fighting for change.
And then there's Joan Baez, another incredible voice from that era. Her voice was, wow, just so pure, so powerful. And she used it to amplify the message of the civil rights movement. And she didn't just sing about it, she lived it, performing at rallies, even marching on Washington with Dr. King.
It's that commitment. Baez didn't just lend her voice, she put herself on the line for what she believed in. Her activism went way beyond the music, making her a really potent symbol of the fight for equality.
It's amazing how, in the 60s, folk music became about so much more than just entertainment. It was a force for real change, a soundtrack for a revolution. But speaking of forces of nature, our deep dives brought us to a true legend, Bob Dylan. I mean, you say folk music, you think Bob Dylan.
Oh, absolutely. Bob Dylan, he was a game changer, no question. His lyrics, they were like poetry, perfectly capturing the anxieties and the hopes and dreams of a generation questioning everything. Songs like Blowin' in the Wind and The Times They Are A-Changin', they became anthems for a generation demanding answers.
But then, in a move that well, that kind of shook the folk world. He went electric at the Newport Folk Festival back in '65. Can you imagine being in that audience? It's like unthinkable now, but back then, some diehard folk fans saw it as like a betrayal.
Oh, yeah. It was a huge moment in folk music. Some folks felt like Dylan was abandoning the traditional acoustic roots of the genre, but others saw it as a natural progression, right? Like, embracing the electric guitar was a way to reach more people, amplify his message even louder.
It seems like such a small thing now, plugging in an electric guitar, but back then, seismic shift.
Totally. It sparked a huge debate about what folk music even was, you know? Was it about clinging to tradition no matter what, or was it about evolving, adapting, using new tools to express those timeless universal themes? Dylan going electric proved that folk music wasn't afraid to evolve, to redefine itself.
And boom. Just like that, folk rock explodes onto the scene.
It's true. Dylan really opened the door for a whole wave of artists, right? Simon and Garfunkel, Joni Mitchell, the Byrds, they all took those storytelling roots of folk music, infused it with that rock energy, and connected with a massive audience. It was huge.
And it's amazing how music can like go through these transformations, these evolutions, without losing its heart, you know?
Mm-hmm.
These artists, they proved that folk music was more than just a sound. It was a spirit, a way of connecting with people on a deeper level.
It's about that raw honesty, right? That vulnerability, the courage to tackle some pretty heavy stuff through music. It's the same thread connecting Woody Guthrie singing about the Dust Bowl to, like, Simon and Garfunkel's The Sound of Silence, capturing that human experience no matter the musical packaging.
So we've gone from, like, campfire sing-alongs to these massive festival stages, from protest songs to deeply personal reflections. It makes you wonder, though, where does folk music fit in today? Did it ride off into the sunset after the 60s, or has it managed to stick around?
That's the thing about folk music. It might not always be in the spotlight, but its influence, man, it's everywhere. Think about the popularity of artists like Brandy Carlisle, Jason Isbell, the Lumineers. They all draw inspiration from those folk roots.
So it's less about banjos and protest signs these days and more about artists who aren't afraid to, to bare their souls a little bit.
Exactly. That rawness, that willingness to be real, to talk about the tough stuff, that's the legacy of folk music. It's all about connecting with people,
Yeah.
sharing those stories that resonate across generations. And that's something that will never go out of style.
Wow, we've really journeyed through the heart and soul of folk music today. From those humble beginnings to its impact on social change to its lasting influence on artists today, it's been incredible. So as we wrap up this deep dive, what's the one thing you hope our listeners take away from all of this?
I'd say this. Folk music, it's way more than just a genre. It's a living, breathing history. It's about the power of music to inspire, to console, to even spark a revolution. It's about our shared stories, our struggles, and that hope we find in connecting with each other through music. So I guess what I'm saying is, listen closely. You might be surprised how those echoes of the past, they resonate in the music we hear all around us today.
Beautifully said. And on that note, we'll leave you all to explore the amazing world of folk music. Who knows? Maybe you'll discover your next favorite song or artist along the way. Until next time, keep those ears open and remember, never underestimate the power of a good story set to music.